Good evening, guys. In the last session, we started our discussion related to time leaf, right? Time leaf we can use as presentation technology in Spring WebMVC applications. Time leaf we can use as an alternate for JSP. Earlier, we developed our applications by using JSP. JSP, Java, standard pages we can use for presentation logic. But the problem is JSP pages cannot be executed in the browser directly. Every JSP page should be converted into servlet for the execution. As the alternate for the JSP, we can go for time leaf. Time leaf is a template engine which can be used in the HTML pages directly. Right, performance wise, time leaf pages are faster than JSP pages. So we created our application with the time leaf. To develop the web applications, we are using web starter, and here, as we are using time leaf for the presentation, time leaf starter is required in the form.xml and dev tools to restore our latest changes in the code. We created Spring controllers. Controller is responsible to handle the request coming from the UI. So we created a product controller, which will take product data from the form. So to represent the class as a controller, I'm using @controller. Here one method is available to display the form. Here another method is available to handle the form submission. For that, we have created time leaf template. Time leaf templates are available in the templates folder. Index.html file is available. This index.html file contains time leaf template. Time leaf form is available. Whenever we submit the form data will come to our controller. Controller is printing that data on the console and displaying a success message. Let's run this application. Run as boot app. Run as boot app. Now application getting started. Let's access this application in the browser. Let's access this application in the browser. Localhost :8080. When we access this application, localhost :8080, then you can see product ID, product name, and product price is available. So here, enter the details, 1 or 2, keyboard and price, click on submit. So it is giving a message, product saved. See here, in the console, the product data is printed. That means from the UI, from the HTML page, the data is sending to the controller. Controller taking the data in the form of binding object, and it is printing on the console. That's it. Now here, guys, when user is not entering anything, still the form is getting submitted. Still the message coming as a product saved with the null values. Now I want to perform validations on this application. If user don't enter the data for the fields, I want to display a validation message. So in order to implement such kind of validation, here I'm going to use my form.xml file to configure the dependency. Spring Boot provided a dependency to deal with the validation. That is, Spring Boot starter validation dependency is available. Spring Boot starter validation. Perfect. So already we are using time leaf starter and we are using web starter. Along with this, I'm using a validation called Spring Boot starter validation. So now with this validation, we can write the validations on our binding classes. Now, so product class is available. So here product ID, product name, product price. All these variables are required. So when I want to specify some validation, here I am using a annotation called @NotNull. This value, this field value should not be null when the form is getting submitted. Right. So here I'm taking a annotation which is called not null annotation. Not null annotation. This form field should not be null. Form field should not be null. It is mandatory. Similarly, here also not null. Not null. And this one is also not null. That means I want to mention that these are mandatory fields. Not null represents these are mandatory fields. So like this, I'm representing not null annotation. Now, when these variables are null, then how we are going to validate them? In order to validate them, I'm going to use a annotation called valid annotation. So whatever the validations I have given on this product object, those validations should work. Not null, not null, not null. That means these variables should not be null. So now here I'm taking valid annotation, which is used to validate. Then suppose if, for example, if validations are failed, user did not enter the data, then to display error message to the user, I'm taking one more parameter for the method, which is called binding result. I'm taking binding result as a parameter. So what I will do is, if result dot has errors, for example, if the form is having the validation errors, then I want to return the same form. If it does not have the validations, then only I want to send this message. If the form is having some validation, if result has errors, then I want to return the same page. So now when I'm returning that same page, I'm going to print a validation message, right? How I am going to print that validation message? In the index.html, we need to make some changes to print a validation message. So how to print a validation message on the index page? So here TD is available. To print a validation message, I'm taking another TD. To print that validation message, right? TD, th colon, if time leaf template, if it is having any errors, then I want to print that error, saying that PID is product ID is mandatory, ID is required. I want to print a message called ID is required. When I need to print this message, if this variable validation is failed, then I want to print it. $fields dot has errors of PID. If the PID is having the errors, then I need to print that annotation. TH colon errors, right? Which field is having the error? That field we need to specify. So if you submit the form without entering the data, then here in the product controller, form data will be binded to this product object. When the form data is binded to this product object, so I'm checking that product object is having a validation, not null annotation is available. So here I'm checking in the binding result, do we have any errors on this result? If there is any error, then return the same page without any message. If fields has error, if the field has errors for the product ID, what is the variable name? PID is the variable. If the fields, the form fields, if we are having any errors, if the PID is having any error, then the PID variable should have the error message. What is the error message? ID is required. Let's verify, is it working or not? Run as boot application. Let us check it. So that mandatory validation is getting displayed on the field or not. If it is displaying for that field, then we will add the same thing for the other fields also. Good. Application started. Clear the console. Now go to browser, refresh, reload our page. Page is reloaded. Click on submit. Now it is coming the message as must not be null. So the validation message is coming must not be null. How that validation is coming must not be null? Here we have used @not null annotation. So let me give the message here. Message is equal to ID is required. Let me give the message as ID is required. Now clear the console. Now submit. Now it is coming as ID is required. So whatever the message that you want to display, that message you can print up. That message you can print here itself. ID is required. Now I will give message is equal to name is required. And here I will give the message as message is equal to price is required. So whenever this validation is failed, then I want to print this message on that field. So same thing, let's add it for the remaining fields also. So if pname field validation is failed, then pname validation message should be printed. So same thing, if a price validation is failed, then that price validation message I want to print here. Save it. Now refresh. Let's load the form again. Click on submit. ID is required. Name is not required, is not coming. Name is a string value. For string value, it is empty. ID is going as null value, not null. But for the string, this not null is not working. Let me go for not empty. Let me go for annotation called not null. It is not null value. Name is coming as string. Now, what annotation I need to use for the string variable? For integer, it is working with the null. For the price, it is working with the null. But for the string, it is not working. Not null is not working. So it is not considering as a null value. It is considering as an empty value. Clear the console. Submit the form. ID is required. Price is required. Because PID coming as a null. Price is coming as a null. So for the null, we are giving the validation on the product class as not null. As not null. Right. Now for the name, let me do one thing. At the rate size annotation, I'm going to specify size annotation. Min is equal to 3. Max is equal to 8. Minimum 3 characters, maximum 8 characters I need for the name. Product name, minimum 3 characters and maximum 8 characters are required. Size must be between 3 and 8. Size must be between 3 and 8. Like this, for that, I'm taking so size annotation, size minimum 3, maximum 8 characters are required for the name. Now load this form. When the form is loaded, click on submit button. It is giving ID is required. Size must be between 3 and 8 and price is required. So let me enter the ID. Let me enter the name and let me enter the price and click on submit. Then we are getting the message as product saved. If I don't enter any data, if I click on submit, then the form validation is coming. The validation message is displaying. Got it? So now, how we have implemented that validation? To implement the validation in our project, I have added a dependency in the form.xml. What is the dependency I have added? Spring Boot Starter validation dependency I have added in our form.xml. And along with this dependency, I have taken some annotations in the binding class. So user will enter the data in the form. That form data will be binded to product class object. So I want to verify the data is coming correctly or not into the product class object. To verify the data coming correctly or not into the product class object, we are using @not null, @not null, and @not null. Got my point? So here I'm using @not null annotation. I'm using @not null annotation. So then if the validation is failed, how to verify the PID is failed? So now I am checking if the fields field is having any error or not. If the PID field is having any error, then let's print that PID error message here. PName field is having any error or not, let's verify. if does the PName field is having any error or not, we are verifying. If the PName field is having any error, then we are printing that error message here. Same thing for the price also. Like this, we can perform server-side validations by using our Spring Web MVC. So here, if you see product controller, I made a small change in the controller. We are taking product object as an input. That product object we are validating by using @valid annotation. Whatever the annotations we have written on the product class, are those annotations are satisfied with the data given by the form or not. For that, we are using @valid annotation. So this valid annotation will be validating the product class object. If the validations are failed, validation messages will be stored into the variable. So binding result, it is used to verify that product class object is having any errors or not. If they are having any errors, return the same page, then print the messages. If there are no errors, then take the form data. If there are no errors, then take the form data, store into database, and display success message to the user. So if I enter the data, and if I submit this, then product saved, messages are not coming. When we don't enter the data, then only validation messages are coming. Like this, we can perform form validations by using @valid. To verify validation errors are available or not, binding result object we are taking. If a result is having any errors, then return that page. Otherwise, no need to return that page. Got it. So let me push this change. Yesterday, we pushed our changes to GitHub, right? So whatever the changes I made in the code, let me push these changes to the GitHub. Same repository, guys, just I will push the latest changes. So where I have modified the form.xml file, new dependency is added. Binding class is modified because we have added validation annotations on the binding class. Controller class modified, we used @valid annotation. Index.html is modified to print validation messages to the user. Let me stage these files. Then let me commit these files, git commit -m, form validations added. Then let me push this file, git push. My file is pushed to git repository. Can you guys check it and confirm in the git? Can you guys check it and confirm in the git? Is our latest code reflecting in the git? Is our latest code reflecting in the git? Come on, guys. Please confirm latest code reflecting in the GitHub or not. Please check it and confirm. Yeah, perfect. Good. So with this, we understood how to develop JSP based application and how to develop time leaf based application. Right, guys? Now, so here we have created a Spring Boot application and we are running our Spring Boot applications. Whenever we are running our Spring Boot application, by default we are getting Tomcat as a embedded server. Let us see this application. This is our time leaf application. In this application, we are having one controller, that is message controller, message-controller.java. So whenever we send a request, whenever we run this application, first of all, let us see, run as boot application. We are running boot application. When we are running the boot application, by default, it is giving Tomcat server, right? So see, Tomcat started with the port number 8080 and our application is also running on the port number 8080. Tomcat server is working. By default, Tomcat is coming as embedded server. Now, how to change embedded server from Tomcat to Jetty? I want to use Jetty as a embedded server instead of Tomcat. How to configure Jetty as embedded server? How to configure Jetty as embedded server? Let's understand. Now, when I create the boot application, by default, Tomcat starter is coming in our project. So when I'm creating the web application, I'm not selecting the Tomcat. See here, file, new, Spring Starter project. I'm going to create a new application, 19th application, WebMVC, Jetty app. Right, Maven project, packaging type as a WAR file. Click on next. I'm using only web dependency, guys. I'm using only web dependency and the dev tools. Click on next, click on finish. I have not selected Tomcat starter. I just selected web starter and I selected dev tools. Now close the remaining projects available in this workspace. Unrelated projects I have closed. Go to form.xml. In the form.xml, if you observe boot starter web dependency coming, we have selected that to develop the web application by using Spring Boot, this web starter is required, and DevTools dependency is coming. And you see starter Tomcat came by default. So that is coming as default dependency with the web starter. So I want to develop a web application by using Spring Boot. To develop a web application by using Spring Boot, we are using web starter. When I add the web starter, Tomcat starter coming by default, that is working as embedded server for us. Now, I don't want this Tomcat. I want to change the embedded server from Tomcat to Jetty. How can we do that? So let me comment this dependency, or let me remove this dependency. I am saving this dependency here. I removed that dependency from my form.xml. I removed this dependency from the form.xml. Now, let me run our application, run as boot app. See, I removed the Tomcat dependency from the project and I'm trying to run my application. When I run my application by removing the Tomcat dependency, still, can you see Tomcat is starting by default? Can you see? Still, Tomcat is starting by default. Tomcat is starting by default, or Tomcat is not starting by default. Guys, by default, Tomcat is started, or Tomcat is not started by default. By default, Tomcat is started because whenever you use web starter, then by default, Tomcat will come as embedded server. Whether you add this dependency or you don't add this dependency, that doesn't matter. Spring Boot starter web is coming as, it is giving Tomcat as the default embedded server. Now, I don't want this Tomcat as embedded server. Even though I removed the dependency from the pom.xml, still when I run my Spring Boot web application, it is starting Tomcat as the default embedded server. I want to remove the Tomcat from my project and I want to add Jetty as the default server. So what we need to do for that? Here, with this dependency, Tomcat is coming. Now, in order to remove the Tomcat, we need to configure exclusions. We need to configure exclusions. In that, we need to configure exclusion. In that, we need to configure group ID and artifact ID. Okay. Whenever you add the web starter, then starter Tomcat is coming as default embedded server because of Maven transdiv dependency. Because of the Maven transdiv dependency management, this Tomcat starter is coming by default. Are you able to follow me? Are you able to follow me? Are you able to follow me? So whenever we add a web starter, the web starter is downloading the Tomcat starter by default because of transdiv dependency management. Whenever you use web starter to create a web application requires a server. So it is taking by default a Tomcat server. It is taking by default Tomcat server. But now I am not interested with the Tomcat. I want to go for Jetty. I'm not interested with the Tomcat. I want to go for Jetty. So then you need to exclude the Tomcat from the web starter. How to exclude the Tomcat from the web starter? By using this exclusion, right? After excluding this, you need to add Spring Boot starter Jetty dependency. We need to add Spring Boot starter Jetty dependency. Got it? Exclude the Tomcat starter from the web starter, then configure Jetty. Now, let me run my application. Let me run my application. 1 minute. Let me reset the perspective. Yeah. See here the changes that I am making. The changes that I am making from the web starter, I'm excluding my Tomcat starter and I am configuring Jetty starter. That's it. That is the change that I made. Let me stop my application and let me run my application. Run as boot application. Run as boot application. You see, I'm running my Spring Boot application. See the difference. See the difference now. Which server is getting started? Guys, which server is getting started now? Tomcat is getting started or Jetty is started? Now, which default server we are getting for our application? Which default server we are getting for our application? We are getting Jetty as the default server for our application. So do you understand how to change? Do you understand how to change embedded server from Tomcat to Jetty? So how to configure Jetty as embedded server? First one, exclude starter Tomcat, exclude starter Tomcat from web starter web, from starter web dependency. Add starter Jetty, add Jetty starter in pom.xml file. So this is the change that I'm making. Here I'm excluding the Tomcat starter. Here I'm adding the Jetty starter. With this change, we are able to remove Tomcat as the embedded server and we are able to configure Jetty as the embedded server. Port number is same. Tomcat also will use 8080 as the default port. Jetty also will use 8080 as a default port. Okay. Now guys, let me create one controller class in our project. Let me create one controller. New class. I'm creating a class with a name called message controller. Right? So to represent this class as a controller class, you know the annotation already, which is @controller annotation. I'm going to write a method. Public string get welcome message. Okay. So here I want to print string message is equal to welcome to Ashok ID. Like this, I want to print some message. Then return the message. Okay. So let us take @get mapping annotation /welcome. Okay. I'm returning a message. Am I returning view page? Am I returning a message? Guys, am I returning a view page? Am I returning a message? I'm returning a message. Now, let me take another method here. Public string get greet message. Get greet message. I'm taking modal attribute. This also I'm binding to a get request. For that I'm using get mapping /greet. Modal.add attribute. Key is the message. Value is good evening. Now here I'm going to return index. Can you see any difference between the above method and the below method? There are two methods available in my REST controller. Both are binded to get request only. One is /welcome, another one is /greet. Can you tell me what difference you observed? Can you tell me what difference you observe? First method is get request method. Second method is also get request method. What is the difference that you observe? Now, let me go to pom.xml. Let me add time leaf starter. Spring Boot starter time leaf. I'm adding time leaf starter. I want to create one index page. In the resources, let me add template index.html. a HTML file. I'm creating the file with a name called index.html. Next and finish. I want to represent this as a time leaf. So how can we do that? XML namespace :th is equal to https://www.timeleaf.org. So here I want to print it. pth : text is equal to $message. Got it? Now, let us see. I have a controller. One is welcome request method. Another one is greet request method. Welcome request method is directly returning welcome to Ashok IT message. Okay. Greet request method is returning index. Got it? Let me run my application, refresh. Where is that time leaf file created? Is it created in the web app? No, I want to keep it in the templates folder. It's not in the web app. I want to keep this file in the templates, right? Refresh, right click, run as boot app. So we used Jetty. Now Jetty is coming as an embedded server. It is running on the port number 8080. Now go to browser, localhost :8080/greet. Now when I go for /greet URL pattern, is there any problem? Guys, when I go for /greet URL pattern, is there any problem? No. So I'm sending a request to /greet URL pattern, get request. It received my request. It is storing the data into model object. Model is used to send the data from controller to UI. Then I'm returning the view page. In that view page, I'm accessing that key. So whatever the value I stored in the key, I'm able to access. So what I want to say is, when we are returning string from this method, dispatcher servlet is understanding that it is a view file and it is rendering that view file on the browser. Right? So here, whatever the index I'm returning, it is considering that index as a view file. It is considering that index as a view file and it rendered that view file and it printed my message. Now here, in the first method, I'm returning the view file. I'm returning the view file name, or I'm returning a message here. In the first method, I'm returning the view file, or I'm returning a message directly. I'm returning a message directly. Let's go to the browser and let's execute /welcome. When I say /welcome, is it processing that or it is not processing that? What dispatcher servlet is doing is, dispatcher servlet is thinking by default controller method will return the view page. It is set here. When I send a request to /greet, it returned index. Dispatcher servlet understood that it has a view file and there is a template available index.html. Dispatcher servlet rendered that HTML file on the browser. So there is no issue. There is no issue. But in the first method, I'm not returning the view file. I'm returning a message directly. What is my requirement is, when somebody send a request to the welcome method, I want to send the response directly to the browser. Whenever I get a request to the /welcome method, I want to send the direct response. No UI required. Whatever I want to send is a direct response to the client. Whenever a request comes to the greet URL, I want to send that request. I want to send the response by using a view file index.html. Are you able to understand my requirement? First method should send the direct response to the client. Second method should send UI page as a response to the client. So that is my understanding. But our dispatcher servlet is able to understand my requirement? No. Dispatcher servlet is not able to understand my requirement. Dispatcher servlet is thinking both methods are returning the view files. But second method only returning the view file. First method is returning a direct response. How to inform to the dispatcher servlet? My second method is only returning the view. First method is not returning the view. Second method returning the view file. So it can process that view file in the browser. But my first method not returning the view file, my first method is giving the direct response. How to represent that my first method is giving the direct response? That's where we will use one annotation called @response body. What is the annotation, guys? @response body annotation we need to write. Whenever we write @response body annotation, then dispatcher servlet will think that, okay, this person is giving a response directly. Should not look for the UI with this name. This is a direct response. I need to send this response to the browser. Whenever the response body annotation is not available, that means it is a view file. I need to search for the view file. So whenever you write response body annotation at the method level, that method return type is not the view file. That method return type is a direct response to the client. Now see the change, /welcome. Am I able to get the response directly? Am I able to get the response directly? Are you clear with my point? Am I able to get the response directly? So when I go for the first method, I'm getting the direct response. When I go for the second method, a UI page is coming. See here, this is index.html. H1, welcome to my application. Welcome to my application. So when you send the request to greet, a UI page is loading. When you send the request to the welcome, direct response is coming. So when your Spring controller methods are returning the string, by default, dispatcher servlet will consider that as a view page. But sometimes I don't want to return the view page. I want to return the direct response. I want to return the direct response. When you want to return the direct response, then we will go for response body. We will go for response body. Sir, in which scenario we will return the response body directly? Let's go to one of our page in the website. Services mock interviews. When you go for this mock interview, let's select your experience, guys. Whenever we select experience as 0 to 3 years, by default, is there any value available in the free dropdown? There is no value available in the free dropdown. Okay. So whenever I click on the mock interviews, view page should be loaded. View page is loading. Now see, currently I'm in the online training. When I click on the mock interviews, view page is loaded. I want to view page as a response. After landing on this page, when I am selecting experience, when I'm selecting the experience, see here, mentor experience, I'm selecting 0 to 3 years. When I select the experience, I'm directly getting the response as $7.99. When I select as 3 to 6 years, price is changed. When I select 6 to 10, price is changed. When I select 10 plus, price is changed. So in this scenario, when your drop-down value is changed, I want to send direct response to the client. So when the drop-down value is changed, I want to send the direct response to the client. In some scenarios, I want to send view page as a response. In some scenarios, I want to send a direct response to the client. When your controller method want to send the direct response to the client, that method should have response body annotation. Are you clear? Controller having a method with response body, controller plus response body, that is REST controller. The next chapter in our course, REST API development. So when you are going to develop the REST API, UI pages will not be available. REST controller method will return direct response to the client. Here, when you use a controller with response body, controller plus response body is equal to REST controller. Okay, so what is REST controller? That we are going to start in the next week. How to develop REST APIs in our project. Okay, REST APIs, microservices we are going to learn. Those things we are going to start from the next week. Okay, so are you able to understand why I am adding response body annotation here? Are you able to understand why I'm adding response body annotation here? Guys, are you able to understand why I am adding response body annotation here? I don't want to go for any view page. If I remove response body annotation here, then what it will understand? If I remove response body annotation, this string will be considered as a response, or this string will be considered as a view page. So when I don't write the response body, this will be considered as a view name. But actually, this is a view name, or this is a response directly. It is a response directly. So when you want to send direct response to the client without view pages, then you can go for response body annotation. Controller plus response body is equal to REST controller. So what is REST controller? REST controller is used to develop the REST APIs. So REST controllers we are going to discuss in the RESTful services, which we are going to start from next week. Are you clear with my point? Are you clear with my point? Yeah. How to send direct response from Spring controller without a view page? This is also one interview question. How to send direct response from Spring controller without using view pages? If you use @response body annotation in the controller method by using @response body annotation in Spring controller class method, we can send direct response to client. We can send direct response to client. For example, if I write @response body here, then what will happen, guys? If I write @response body here in the second method also, what will happen? See here, code is changed. Let me send the request for /greet. What is coming as response? Index is coming as response. So whenever I add a response body, it is thinking the index is the response. It is not considering as a view page. It is considering as a response because of response body. Right? When I add the response body, it will consider this as a direct response. It will consider index. Then what about the model? Model is ignored. There is no use of model whenever you use response body. There is no use of model when you use response body. So if I remove the response body annotation, then it will consider index as a view page. Now, it will consider index as a view page. That view page is rendered. Understand what is the purpose of response body annotation? Controller plus response body is called as REST controller. Controller plus response body is equal to REST controller. Whenever your controller class is having a method with response body, that will act like a REST controller. @controller plus @response body is equal to @REST controller. @controller plus @response body is equal to @REST controller. REST controllers is used to send direct response to client without any web pages, without any view files. So from the controller also, if you want to send the direct response to the client, then we are going to use @response body annotation. We are going to use @response body annotation. Are you clear with my point? Are you clear with my point? Yeah. So two things here. One is how to configure Jetty as the embedded server. How to configure Jetty as the embedded server. So in order to configure Jetty as embedded server, exclude starter Tomcat from starter web dependency by using this exclusion. and add Jetty starter in the pom.xml like this. How to send a direct response from Spring controller without using view pages? By using response body annotation. So for this method, when I use a response body, it will consider that as a direct response, will go to the browser. When I don't use @response body, it will consider that as a view page. That view page will be rendered on the browser. So if the controller class method is having response body, then it will become REST controller. So what is the purpose of REST controller? REST controller is used to send direct response to client without any view file. So direct response we can send to the client without using any view file. Are you clear? Are you clear, guys? Perfect. Good. Now, so with this, we are clear how to send the direct response, what is the purpose of response body, and what is Jetty, how to make Jetty as embedded server, and what is time leaf, how to develop the form by using time leaf, how to perform form validation, how to store and retrieve the data in the web MVC by using data JPA, what is form tag library also we understood, and we discussed about what is model and view object, and we understood what is path parameter, we understood what is query parameter, what is the purpose of path and query parameters, right? And what is Spring Web MVC Tomcat embed Jasper dependency, how to create first web MVC based application we discussed. So as of now, what we have learnt in the Spring Web MVC concepts, right? So by using the concepts, whatever we have learnt, I want to develop one project. Okay, guys. So by developing one project, we can integrate whatever the concepts that we have learnt so far. So we understood what is Spring Web MVC. Spring Web MVC is a module which is used to develop both web and distributed applications by using Spring framework. So Spring is a collection of modules. Web MVC is one of the module which is used to develop web applications. Advantages of Spring Web MVC. So Spring Web MVC provided clearly separated roles: dispatcher servlet, handler mapper, view resolver, view controller, everything to develop applications by using MVC architecture. And the most important advantage in the Spring Web MVC, that is form binding. Whenever you submit a form, you no need to capture the form data by using request.get parameter. Web MVC will give you the data in the form of object directly. Form binding object is available. That is the advantage of the Spring Web MVC. So what is dispatcher servlet? Spring Web MVC architecture we understood. Spring Web MVC architecture we understood. As part of this architecture, we discussed what is dispatcher servlet. Dispatcher servlet is a predefined class in the Spring Web MVC that is responsible to handle the request and response of our application. Dispatcher servlet will hand over the request to handler mapper. Handler mapper is responsible to identify which request should be handled by which controller. Then handler mapper will identify the controller and will give the information to dispatcher servlet. Dispatcher servlet will go and call that controller. Controller is responsible to handle the request. Controller will return model and view object. Controller is responsible to return model and view object. Model represents data in the form of key and value. View represents file name. And we have seen view resolver. View resolver is used to identify where the view files are available, what is the prefix of the view file, and what is the suffix of the view file. And finally, view component is available. View component is used to render that model data on the view file. Okay. And next one, we understood building, developing. We understood what is embedded server. We understood what is embedded server. Whenever you create a boot web application by using web starter, then boot will give you Tomcat as the default embedded server. If you don't want the Tomcat as embedded server, we can take Jetty also as a embedded server. So we have seen Tomcat and Jetty as embedded servers. So the default embedded server is Apache Tomcat. We can exclude the Apache Tomcat and we can configure Jetty also as a embedded server. Building first web application using Spring Boot. Building web application using Spring Boot. We are using Web Starter to build our web application, right? So here we have used controller. What is @controller? @controller is an annotation which is used to represent our Java class as a Spring controller. So when we represent our class as @controller class, that Spring IOC is going to identify that as a controller class and it is going to create the object for the controller. So as it is a Spring Bean, the default scope will be singleton only. Okay. And we have seen what is @get mapping and @post mapping. Get mapping is used to map our method to get request. Post mapping is used to map our method to post request. And we understood what is query param and how to work with them. What is query params and how to work with them. So query parameters are used to send the data from client to server in the URL. To read the data from the query parameter, we will use a request param annotation. And then we use path parameters. What is path params and how to work with them. Path parameters also will come in the URL. To read the data from the URL, to read the path parameters from the URL, we will use path variable annotation. Okay, so here we used request param annotation to read the query parameters, and here we used path variable annotation to read the path parameters from the URL. So we understood what is query parameter and what is path parameter, how to work with them. Then how to develop form-based application. Form-based application development. So initially we developed a form by using basic HTML tags. Then later I developed a student registration form by using Spring Web MVC form tag library. Spring Web MVC form tag library also we used to develop form-based application. Radio button, checkboxes, input fields we developed by using MVC form tag library, right? Then we have seen what is time leaf. Then we seen what is time leaf and how to work with that. Time leaf is also a presentation technology which is alternate for the JSP. So when we compare time leaf and JSP, time leaf is faster than JSP because JSP pages cannot be executed in the browser directly, whereas time leaf pages can be executed in the browser because time leaf we are using in the HTML. So HTML pages can be executed in the browser directly. So Spring Boot form validations, right? By using validation starter, we have implemented validations. Validation starter is provided by Spring Boot. By using validation starter, we are able to implement form validations. Then we discussed what is response body annotation. What is response body annotation? Today only we have seen by using response body annotation, we can send direct response to the client without using any UI. Without using any UI, we can send direct response to the client by using this response body annotation. So as of now, we learned these concepts in the Web MVC. What is Web MVC? Advantages of Web MVC, Web MVC architecture, what is embedded server, how to develop web application by using Spring Boot, what is @controller, what is get mapping and post mapping, what is query param and how to work with query parameters, what is path parameter and how to work with path parameter, how to build form-based applications by using Web MVC, what is Web MVC form tag library, and what is the time leaf, how to perform form validations using time leaf, what is response body annotation, how to make Jetty as default embedded server, how to make Jetty as default embedded server. Today we understood this concept also. Come on, guys. Are you clear? So did I cover all these topics? And we understood how to configure H2 database, how to configure H2 database, embedded database. We stored student form data in the H2 database. H2 dependency we have added in the pom.xml. H2 is a in-memory database, which is a temporary database. So if you want to set up the database immediately without downloading and installing anything, then you can go for H2 database. How to configure H2 database? H2 we can call as embedded database. We have done H2 database also. We integrated WebMVC plus data JPA application development using, we developed one application, web app development using WebMVC plus data JPA plus H2DB. Web application development using WebMVC plus data JPA plus H2. Student registration form we developed. We are able to store that student registration form data into H2 database by using data JPA. Form we developed by using WebMVC. Persistent logic we developed using data JPA. Data we are storing in the H2 database. This application also we have completed. Understood my point? Come on, guys. Did I cover all these topics? And still we need to understand how to add interceptor and how to handle exceptions. What is interceptor in the WebMVC and how to handle exceptions in the WebMVC. Okay, perfect. To configure Jetty as embedded server, we no need to download anything. Just whatever I have given the process, you need to do this. You need to remove this dependency. You need to exclude the dependency from the web starter, and you need to add the Jetty dependency to that. Okay, fine, guys. Tomorrow, I will explain interceptor concept, and I will give one requirement, guys. I want you people to implement that requirement. So by using WebMVC, data JPA, we completed data JPA and we completed WebMVC topics, right? I will prepare one requirement before coming to tomorrow's session. I will share that requirement. So I want you people to try that requirement. Tomorrow, we will discuss interceptor in the WebMVC. What is interceptor? How to add the interceptor to the WebMVC we will discuss. Then I will give you one task. I want you people to try developing that task. Okay? Thank you, guys. With this, I'm stopping for today. We'll continue in the tomorrow session. Until then, bye-bye. Thank you, guys.